Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and today we're going to take a look at creating scene transition effects in Unity. So effects that do this. You fade to a black screen and switch into a different world. And we can have a whole bunch of different transitions in and out of this black screen, and we load in between different scenes as we go. So it's a really simple thing to do, it's really handy, and it's also very, very flexible to play around with and do different transition effects as we go. And just before we get into making this and seeing how it works, make sure you go and wishlist our game Scoot Kaboom, which you can see on the screen here now, on Steam, which really helps us out and lets you know when the game is released and when it goes on sale and when it has a launch sale and discount and all that fun stuff. The release is coming up in a couple of months from now, so it's going to be awesome, it's going to be cool, and I really appreciate everyone who wishlists the game. It's free to do, you're not committing to anything at that point, but it really helps behind the scenes on Steam's backend. So make sure you wishlist the game, and let's go ahead and dive in and make our scene transitions work. So I've got this project set up here. I've got very simple starter stuff set up. If you want to download the starter files for this, they'll be in the description down below. It's basically just some graphics that we're going to use to represent our different scenes. So I've got two different graphics here. I've got this purple Warpland one, and we've got the Sunnyland environment. So these are both free pixel art sets from Antimos. And I've also got a bunch of gradients that we're going to use to create our transitions in our game. But how are we going to do that? So what we're going to do is create a new shader that is going to handle these transitions for us. So first of all, I'm going to go into my scene here, and I'm going to add a canvas, so a UI canvas, because this is what's going to overlay our screen. And then within this, I'm going to add a UI image. There we go. And I'm going to double click on this so we can zoom out. And then I'm going to stretch this out to be the full size of this little window, which is our UI window. And then I'm going to change this to be a black color, because we're going to make it a nice dark black. Not 100% black, just a little bit above black. It's kind of a very typical thing that people do. And there we go. So we've got a very simple little black screen set up, but we don't want it to just pop on and off like this. We want it to make it animate and look pretty cool. So we're going to create a very simple shader using shader graph. So I've already got the universal render pipeline installed in this project. So I'm going to go into this folder called shader that I've made, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to create a new shader, and I'm going to create a 2D renderer using the sprite unlit graph, and we'll call this the scene transition shader. So that's perfectly fine. I'm also going to create a material and apply this to it. So I'm going to right click on this, create material, and we can call this the scene transition matte for material. And this, when we right click on a shader like that, it'll automatically create a material with that shader applied. So you can see up here I have the shader graphs scene transition shader automatically applied to it. Okay, so that's perfect. Let's then apply that to our image. So let's go to our image here, turn it back on. We're going to apply the material like so. So now this is on our little image that we have here. So let's open this up then. I'm going to double click on this here, and on our scene transition shader, we have this window. I'm going to maximize this so we can see it a little bit better. And at the moment we have nothing in here. But what we're going to do is, I'm going to drag this over to the side here. First thing we're going to do is take one of those gradients that you saw a minute ago, and we're going to pass that into this, because that's what we're going to use to control the animated effect of our transitions. So I'm going to go up to our blackboard here, and I'm going to hit plus, and I'm going to add a texture 2D, and I'm going to call this the transition texture. And I'm going to click and drag this over here into our working area. And then to convert this into something we can use, we need to get a sample texture 2D node. So if I hit the spacebar, it brings up my search box, and I can hit sample texture 2D like so. So then I can connect my input texture here into this slot. And at the moment it's just white because we haven't set up a default texture. We'll do that in a moment. But then we can take the color that comes out of this, so the RGBA, and put that into our output here. And as I said, at the moment it makes no difference over here. So let's put a default texture in to use here for our example. So let me just drag this over so we can see a bit better. I'm going to hit my little thing here, and let's select one of these. Let's go with this kind of crisscrossy one. So we've got our little effect applied here. You can see it's doing the same thing down here. I'm going to change this to just be a cube, just to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. So we've got this working the way we would expect it to, but we know that we don't want our image to just look like this. We don't want it to look like an actual gradient. So we're not necessarily going to pass this out into the color value over here. So what I'm just going to do is, first of all, I'm going to deconnect that because we're not going to use it. We're going to go over here and I'm going to add a color value. So I'm just going to call this the main color, and I'm going to give this a default value of, let's just for our testing purposes, let's just make it a blue color, like so. And I'm just going to pop this color over here, and we'll pop it in here, and you can should be able to see. Oh, if I didn't put the alpha value all the way down, there we go. Alpha value up. There we go. We get the blue color down here. So that's perfect. We just did the blue just to make sure we could see that working. Let's put it back up to white so we can see a little bit better what's going on. And then over here, we're going to look at how we can make this texture apply the kind of smooth effect that we want. So the transition effect that we want. So what we're going to use is something called a step node. So a step node basically applies an effect to any gradient that we have like this, where it'll give us essentially a cutoff. So it'll look at a certain value, and anything above that value will be completely white, and anything below it will be completely black. So say we pick the value of gray that is right at this point where the arrow is here. It would say, okay, anything below this is just completely black, and anything above it is completely white. So let's see that in action. Let's just go here. I'm going to create a step node, like so. And then I'm just going to pass into this from one of these here. We don't need to use all of them. We're just going to use one value. So we're just going to pass in this value here, and you'll see, oh, look at this. We got this nice, we got a little bit of a checker pattern here. That's because our X value is 1. So if I drag this down, you can see, oh, look, we're getting our nice scrolling effect. So this is exactly the effect that we want to achieve in our game. And obviously we want to be able to control this value here. We don't want it to just have to go into our shader to drag it around. So let's add another value here. So I'm going to add a vector 1 that we'll call cut off, like so. Let's drag this down to make it a bit bigger so we can see what we want. And then let's drop this in down here, and we can connect this up here. And you can see, so at the moment it's completely white because our default value is 0. If I put it at 0.5, say, you can see it'll control it over here. And let's just put it at 0.75 just to see what's going on there. But let's leave it at 0.5. And now we want to apply this to our sprite over here. Now what we could do is just pop it straight in like this, and you'll see we'll get this weird kind of checkerboard effect, and that works okay, but that doesn't allow us to control the color that we're using here. So we want to actually just control the alpha value, which is what makes things transparent or not. So I'm just going to delete that one. And what we're going to do is split up our color node here. So I'm going to create a split node. So this is going to take the input from our color like this, and it's going to split it out into different values. Then we're going to create a vector 4, because a color has 4 values, R, G, B, and A. And we're going to put R, G, and B into those colors. And then the output of our step node is going to go into the alpha value. And then we can take the output of all of this out here, and there we go. Now we have the same effect, but we also have our color being applied as well, so we can pull this around and see our colors in here. So perfect, that's working exactly how we want it to, and that's essentially the basics of our shader in operation. So I'm just going to save this. We've one more little thing we'll do to this as well, but for a moment I'm just going to save, and we'll see how it works in here. So let's go back to our scene view. If I go to my material, I'm going to give it a texture. So let's pick a different one. Let's go with this kind of one here. You can see straight away it's doing something interesting over here. Now I can change this cutoff value, and just by dragging this up and down, you'll see we get this cool effect applied to our scene. I just realized this is called cut oof, which is a little bit weird. We'll change that in a second. But we got this really cool system working for us now. One extra thing that will be nice is, at the moment these edges are very sharp. We could make it so that these have nice smooth edges in our little transition effect too. Now you might prefer just to have it like this, but we're going to add one extra option in just to make things a little bit nicer. So let's go back into our shader. I'm going to maximize it. Let's rename this to be cut off. There we go, a little bit more sensible. We're going to add in one more value, one vector one that we're going to call edge smoothing. And I'm going to drag this down here into our scene. And here, what we're going to do is, instead of using the step node that we're using, we're going to use something called a smooth step, which will take in the same values we already have. So it'll take in the R from here into the input. The cutoff will be edge 1. But then edge 2, you can already see, is get this blurred pattern. That's because this X value here is what controls making this blurry. So if we go below 0, it'll kind of reflect it back around. So we don't want that. And actually what's happening here is if it goes below 0.5, we have this happening here because our default setting is 0.5. So if it goes below the first input amount of our cutoff, then you'll get it flipping around to do the opposite of what it already had. So what we're going to do in here is we're actually going to add our cutoff to our edge smoothing. Let's say we'll put this at 0.1. So when we combine these together, it'll always be above the 0.5. So let's say if it's 0.1, then essentially this will become 0.6, which means we'll have our sharp edges with a little bit of a smooth gradient to it. So let's do that. So I'm going to add a add node, like so. Take the output of this in here. And let's just collapse this down because we don't need to see the full thing. And take the output of this into here. And then put the output of that into edge 2 of our smooth step. And now we have this cool smooth effect here. So we can switch this out for the alpha input of our vector 4. And you can see immediately on a preview, it looks a bit smoother and a bit nicer. So again, let's save this, unmaximize it. And in our view, suddenly we have this kind of much smoother looking transition going on here. So I can now click and drag this up and down like so. And it works nicely in our scene. So perfect. That's our shader essentially built. There's not really too much else we need to do with our shader. But what we would really obviously need to do is make this actually work in our game. So let's go ahead and make a simple script that will allow us to activate and control this shader when the game is running. So I'm going to go back into my assets folder. I'm just going to create a script here, create a C# script that we'll call scene transition controller. Doesn't really matter too much what we're calling this. This is mostly for demonstration purposes. And I'm going to attach this to our image that we have here. Pop that on there. And then let's open this up. So we're going to make this control the graphic or the transition effect that we have. And we're also going to make it load into another scene. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to include using Unity Engine.UI because I want to access the image component. And I want to use using Unity Engine.scene management so we can load into different scenes. Let's have in our references here, I'm going to have, first of all, a public string scene to load. So this is what's going to load us into the next scene. And I'm going to have a private image that I'll call the image, which then in the start function, I'm going to make it get that component. So the image equals get component image, so that we find the image we want to have. Then another thing we're going to need is how fast we want our transitions to happen. So I'm going to say public float transition speed, and by default I'm going to set that to be 2. And finally, I'm going to need a way to keep track of whether we should be showing the image or should be hiding the image at any particular time. So whether we should be making it appear on screen or making it disappear. So I'm going to create a private bool called should reveal. Okay, so how do we control the value on our shader? Well, what we need to do is, if we go back into Unity here, if we look at the image, wait for this to compile, there we go. So we have our scene to load. For the moment, I'm just going to make it reload the scene we already have. So I'm just going to say load the start scene. We'll add an additional scene in a few moments. Actually, you know what? Let's just save an extra scene. So I'm just going to Control Shift S, save Let's call this start 2. Just very simple, not anything too complicated going on here. And in my build settings, I had 2 previous ones in here. I'm going to drag both of these in here. There we go. And then with those done, we're perfectly happy. So I'm in start 2 now, so that'll load back to start. Let's jump back to start. And I'm going to change this to load to start 2. So that's just a way for us to be able to move between scenes and demonstrate what's going on. Actually, I'll jump over into start 2 here. And I'm going to make this visually different by disabling the warped environment. So now we've got this other environment. So it should be very obvious in our game view here. If we're in start, it's all purple. If we're in start 2, it's this nice seaside visual. So let's go back to start here. And we'll go to our transitions, and on our image here, we want to be able to access the shader. So we know that the shader is controlled with our material here. So what we can do is we can go to the material, and we go look over here, and we know on the material we have this cutoff value, and this controls what we can see. So we want to be able to control this value through our code, and we can do that very, very easily. So what we'll do is go back in here, and let's say if we should reveal, we'll go with that at the moment. So imagine the screen is completely covered up and we're making it disappear away. So we're making it go from being completely black like that to fading in like this. So how we want to do that is we want to control that value. So we'll go to our image and get the material that we're using. So the image dot material, and we can set a float value, and then we need to tell it the name of the float we want to use. So you might think that we could use the value that we have here. So we could just say, hey, use the cutoff name. But that's not how it works in shaders in Unity. So we can't just directly access this variable. What we actually need to access is back in our shader over here, where we have the cutoff value. We have a reference here. So you can see it's vector1, blah, 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 blah. So we would need to reference this exactly. But obviously this is very complicated and very hard to remember. So rather than just using this value, we're going to rename this in here. So I'm going to call this underscore cutoff, like so. So now we've replaced that value. So I'm going to save this asset. So we make sure we save when we make a change like that. And then back in our script, in here we can say we're going to set that float to be, we're going to set that underscore cutoff. And the value we want to give it, well, we want it to gradually move towards being revealed. So we're going to use a mathf.move towards. And the value we want to go from is whatever the cutoff value currently is. So to get that, we can just say the image.material.getFloat. So we can get that float value of underscore cutoff. We want to make it go towards 1.1. Usually we want to make it go a little bit higher than 1 because there can be some weird artifacting where if we go to exactly 1, it might not reveal completely. So we're going to go to 1.1. And how fast we want it to happen, because we're in move towards here, how fast we want it to happen is our transition speed. So transition speed multiplied by time.delta time. Okay, so we'll close that, close our other open brackets and hit our semicolon. And there we go. We have our should reveal working. So let's go in and test this out. So go back in here, we'll let this compile. I'm going to put the shader back down to being completely closed. And if we go to our image here, when I play, I'm going to turn off maximize on play. Oh, I don't have a way of activating this, I just realized. Because we don't have this as an exposed variable. So let's very quickly just say if the player presses if input dot get key down key code dot s. So if you press the S key, then we're going to switch between them. So we're going to then say should reveal equals not should reveal. So if it's false, we're going to make it true, and if it's true, we're going to make it false. So let's go back in here, let that compile, and let's press play now. So now this time, once we're going, if I now hit the S key, boom, we get us switching nicely to our view zooming out. So we obviously wanted to go back the other way as well. So let's go back in here, and we're going to say here, where we have the should reveal, we're going to say else And we're going to copy this here. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in here. But this time, instead of going to 1.1, we want to go to minus 0.1. But one of the extra little quirks is that if we have our smoothing applied, going to minus 0.1 won't work exactly because we're adding on that little bit extra with the extra gradient. So whatever the size of our smoothing is, we need to also take that away here. So if we go back into Unity, where we have our smoothing value, I'm going to rename this to be underscore smoothing, like so. So again, I'm going to save the asset. And then in here, what we're going to do is minus 0.1 minus whatever the image.material.getFloat for underscore smoothing is. So we're going to take away that value, and we're still going to use the same transition speed and all that fun. Okay, so let's save this. Let's go back in here. There we go. Let this compile, and we should be able to test this out and make sure that this is working. So we can let that play. Then when I hit S, there we go. It fades in and out using our scrolling texture effect. Okay, so next thing we want to do is make sure that when our value is all the way completely dark, so when our screen is completely obscured, that's when we're going to load. So what we're going to do is here, when we have should reveal, so we're making it go invisible, so we're able to see our normal world. But here is where we're making it go completely black. So when we're making it go completely black, we'll do a check to see if we reach complete blackness. So if the image dot, oops, try this again, the image dot get, material dot get float, that's what I was trying to do. So if the cutoff value that we're setting, so if cutoff, if that is equal to the value we're trying to set it to here, so I can just copy this. So if it gets to be equal to that value, well then we know that it's completely black at that point. So if that's true, then we can tell the scene manager to load into the next scene. So scene manager load scene, scene to scene, what do we call that up here? Scene to load. Yes, here we go. Scene to load. Okay, so we can tell that when it goes completely black, load into the other scene. So let's go back in here. Let's let that compile, and we can press play. And now when I hit S, there, oh, one thing we're missing is completely going over and over and over again there. And the one thing we're missing in this situation is that in the start function, we need to make sure that should reveal is true. So when we load into the next scene, we want to make sure that we're making that screen fade away again. Because obviously at the moment, it was just getting stuck in. Okay, we're staying completely black permanently. Okay, so let's start the game here. When we play, there we go. It gets revealed. We're in our scene. If I hit S, it goes black. And we switch over to the next scene. So look perfectly. We can see up at the top, we're in start 2. It's also pretty obvious because of the visuals we have set up. We're back in start now and in start 2. So we can keep switching between them, which is great. Now, obviously, we also have, we can see we have this one effect in action here, but we did see that there was a whole bunch of different patterns we can use. And you can essentially create any patterns you want. These are just gradients. That's all they are. It used in different ways. You can, for example, this one is not even a gradient. It's just different colored panels, and that creates an effect. If we go to our shader here, let's select that one here, and if I click and drag this around, you can see we get this cool little effect like this. So you can do lots of different things with it, but it would be fun in our game if we could just have our transitions do different transitions at different times, and we're going to make it randomly pick transitions from the list. So we need to assign this texture based on our various different fade patterns that we have here. So to be able to assign this texture, we should know at this point we need to use a reference value. So in here, I'm going to call this underscore transition effect. Oh, no, I didn't spell transition correctly. There we go. And we'll save that asset. And then what we're going to do is back in our script in here, I'm going to create a function down the bottom called public void switch transition, like so. And I'm going to make this be called whenever we press the S key. So whenever we start a new transition, we're going to say use the switch transition function. And I'm going to make it also happen at start as well. So we get a different transition when we go in and out of our little effects. Okay, so we've got our switch transition set up. So now we need to make it actually do something. First thing we're going to do is create an array of all of those sprites. So public sprite array that we'll call, let's just call it transitions, like so. And then down here in our switch transition function, we're going to make it pick a random value within that array. So let's say an int value called new transition equals random dot range between 0 and the transitions dot length. And then that we have that one picked, so we've picked from our array of sprites, we're going to apply that to our material. So the image dot material dot set texture will be the transition effect is what we want to apply. That's the name that we just gave it in our shader graph a moment ago. And then what we want to apply to it is we want to go into our transition sprite array. So we'll go to the transition sprite array at position new transition. But you can see we get this red underline because what we're trying to apply here is a sprite and not a texture. So sprites and textures are slightly different, but we can solve that very easily by just saying, hey, within that sprite, we want to get the texture from it. So we're just getting the texture from that sprite. And that's it. That's all we need to do. So let's save this. Let's go back in here. Let that compile. And now on our image here, we now have a slot for transitions. So I'm just going to lock this so I can multi-select these over here. So I'm going to select all of these transitions, click and drop them in here like so. And I'm going to save this and I'm going to go into the other scene I had set up. Now obviously you'd probably want to make this a prefab, would make this a lot easier, but just for time purposes we just kind of kept it simple as we went. Let's lock this as well. There we go, select them all, drop them in there, and now we have them all set up. So let's save this scene too. I'm going to unlock this, and now I'm going to maximize on play, and I'm going to hit play here. We've got our scene, so now when I hit our transitions, we'll get a different transition effect every single time. And that's it. So as you can see, we've got these cool effects going now, and these are all literally just different types of gradients applied to our game. It's very, very simple to do, very, very fun to do as well, and it's actually quite a lot of fun to try and make your own gradients and different effects that you can play around with and have cool, interesting things going on in your game. So we're pretty much done. I just want to point out one minor little thing that you might have noticed is in the console down here, we keep getting an error saying we don't have a texture property main text, and that's just because the image system is looking for, in case we want to apply an image to our UI element, which we don't really want to do with this anyway, but what we can do just to solve that is very quickly go into our shader, maximize it. Can't see half of this stuff over here. There we go. I'm going to add a texture 2D that I'm going to call main text, but most importantly, I'm going to give it the reference of underscore main text. I'm going to drag this into our scene up here. We're going to give this a sample texture 2D. I'm going to collapse this up, pop that in there like that, and then we're going to multiply this by our color. So we're going to go multiply like so. It's going to take in this, and it's going to take in this, and it's going to output it to our split node like so. So very simple to do. Is that's just how we can add a very simple texture and add color to it if we wanted to using our color. So if I save this, or save the asset even, then collapse it back down. Let's get rid of this. Now when we play, we don't get that error down the corner anymore. So perfect. That's it. That's all we needed to do just to fix that up. And now we have a cool transitioning effect system working in our game. Thanks for watching this video. I'll be back soon with more tutorial goodness. Keep watching, keep being awesome. Don't forget to hit that subscribe, hit the like, all that fun YouTube stuff that everybody tells you to do. And keep being awesome.